ETV, The State, the Greenville News, the Island Packet, the Beaufort Gazette, the Sun News of Myrtle Beach, the Herald of Rock Hill, and the Item of Sumter present ETV Debates. Tonight, Democratic candidates for Superintendent of Education. And now, your moderator, Dean of USC's College of Mass Communications and Information Studies, Charles Bierbauer.
Good evening and welcome to tonight's Democratic primary debate for State Superintendent of Education. Joining me tonight to ask questions of the candidates are Gina Smith from the Island Packet and Beaufort Gazette and Rachel Southmaid of the Herald of Rock Hill. Candidates joining us this evening are Tom Thompson of Columbia, Sheila Gallagher of Florence, Jerry Govan of Orangeburg, and Montrio Belton of Rock Hill. Before we begin tonight, some ground rules. Each candidate will have 1 minute to answer the question, and if necessary, I will allow a 30-second rebuttal. We drew names when the candidates arrive for order in which we will start, and having said that, I'll ask the first question to Tom Thompson, but it's a question for all of you as we will go rotating through it. The education system in South Carolina, we have, or seem to have, on the one hand, the General Assembly seemingly all-powerful in a lot of respects, and local school boards that are fiercely and jealously guarding their turf. So what is the most important role for the State Superintendent of Education, and how are you fit for that? Mr. Thompson?
I think the most important role for the State Superintendent of Education is to be the advocate for public education in the state. I think the State Superintendent has to fight for all resources available for the state and for the children in the districts and for a high quality education as opposed to a minimally adequate education. The reason why I'm the best candidate is that I have over 34 years of experience in education as a high school math teacher, principal, University of South Carolina employee in the Department of Educational Leadership, State Department of Education employee, and graduate school dean at South Carolina State University. So I'm in the unique position that I've not only practiced leadership, but I've taught those who are practicing leadership in the school districts in this state.
Ms. Gallagher.
Yes, sir. Thank you. I'll piggyback on what Tom said and add, as a teacher, classroom teacher of 30+ years, I understand the dealings that our school boards have. They are at the most local level, and they have our immediate children at heart. They have our teachers, and then when we come to the General Assembly, this is where we actually have our biggest concern, because they don't seem to see what our school boards see. So I would like for us to be more than just advocates for and with the General Assembly. I believe we have a big job ahead with the General Assembly in order to bring them around to where our school boards are, because our school boards understand the value of that dollar, and I'm not sure that our legislative body does.
Segue to our legislative. Mr. Govan.
Thank you. That's an excellent question. I believe that the State Superintendent of Education has to be the advocate-in-chief for public education in the state of South Carolina. This is not something new in terms of this state's support of public education. The state has been contributing in terms of supporting something as important as this for many years, going back actually to the 1700s. I believe I'm the best person for that role because of a couple of reasons. One, I have 19 years of experience in terms of education, and I have 21 years in terms of as a policymaker. And I think one of the main issues or challenges that we have in this state, there's a disconnect between public policy and public education that is in the state. And so I believe that with my knowledge and experience of the legislative process, in addition to having worked at the grassroots level, starting as a parent educator and working my way up to the district level as a county attendance supervisor, I have a good feel in terms of what's happening not only in the school districts, but also in terms of with those working parents out there and the children whom so much is riding on.
Mr. Belton?
The Superintendent of Education, first of all, thank you so much for ETV for having us here tonight. The job of the Superintendent of Education is to be the leader of public education in South Carolina, to drive the discussion on where we need to go in the future regarding public education. Also, and more importantly, why I'm best suited for this job is not only do I have the practical experience as a classroom teacher, as a coach, as a high school administrator, as an assistant principal at the high school level, 7.5 years as a principal, and also as director of school transformation. I've worked at all levels of education. I've seen what it's like to be a classroom teacher, how to lead discussions on teaching and learning when we start talking about teacher effectiveness. But more importantly, I'm a parent. I'm a parent that has a child that's in the 3rd grade. I'm a parent of a child in kindergarten. So not only is my role as superintendent of education, I have the understanding from a theoretical perspective, I have it from a practical perspective, and I also have it as a parent. And I think those 3 different lenses in which I can look at education makes me unique for this job.
Thank you all, candidates. Next question is from Gina Smith and started with Ms. Gallagher.
Gotcha. South Carolina Democrats have long pushed for more state funding for school districts, particularly poor rural ones. Our Republican governor, Nikki Haley, has got an education initiative included in both the House and Senate budget that would partially accomplish this goal. Do you agree with this Republican-backed reform? Ms. Gallagher.
I think the governor has come a long way. It may have taken her 3 years to get there. But what we are looking for with these programs that she is suggesting, or these initiatives, has to do with the funding issue. Our rural areas are much different from our urban areas, and what they need is different. And I'm not sure her plan has addressed that altogether. Again, though, the funding is the problem for being sure that you're going to have more classroom teachers, you're going to have more educational support professionals in these areas if you're going to attempt to promote what her program is.
Well, I think that's an excellent question. The problem is that in South Carolina, when it comes to funding, when you look at what we've done, and Democrats have taken the lead and been in the lead in this issue for years, is the issue of sustainability and also of dealing with how do we provide permanent funding for public education in the state of South Carolina. Now, the governor has put this proposal on the table, I think, with $100 million in terms of funding, but no one's asked the basic question in terms of whether those are reoccurring or non-reoccurring dollars. If they're non-reoccurring dollars, of course, we're right back next year in terms of dealing with the same problem. And when you look at the history of funding of education in South Carolina, if you look at the austerity measures that we had to go through as a result of the downturn in the economy, we have to find a more permanent way of funding public education in this state if we're going to continue to make the improvement and gains that's necessary to prepare our children for the new global economy.
Certainly, if you're going to be the chief advocate of education for public education for the state of South Carolina, you have to support any initiative that's willing to put resources out to help children, particularly in our communities that are most. I'm from Abbeville, South Carolina. Abbeville is one of these rural communities that can significantly benefit. My nieces and nephews who are in schools in Abbeville now can benefit from these reading coaches, the expansion of technology into these communities. So certainly I'm in favor of it. I will add the caveat, though, that these have to be reoccurring dollars that we understand and we ensure that we can sustain this long term. Now, what I am concerned about, and I'll take this opportunity to talk about, is this reduction in career and technical education. And I know the governor is advocating for it, and I'm going to call on the General Assembly now, this $12 million loss to career and technical education. If we're talking about targeting the high school dropout rate, we've got to ensure that the funds are there to ensure that children can come out of high school ready for the workforce. And so I not only support this initiative here, but I also support the reinstating of that $12 million.
I fully endorse the governor's stance on public education, but I don't think it goes far enough. I understand that she is in favor of early childhood education. I don't think she goes far enough in that area. I would like to introduce the concept of birth to kindergarten, early childhood education. Not so that we get our small babies in school, but so that we begin as a public school district, public school system, to work with the parents to make sure that children are ready for public school when they get to kindergarten. They need the kinds of experiences that are rich and rewarding in home, as well as the parents need the resources to make sure that they're able to provide the kinds of experiences that are needed. I strongly believe, and I know that if we get them at kindergarten ready to learn, we can give them a high quality education.
Next question is from Rachel Southmaid, and starting with Mr. Govan.
This is a question that comes directly from teachers and principals here in South Carolina. How would you structure a teacher evaluation plan to fairly and accurately assess our state's educators?
Well, first of all, I think that we have a pretty good system in place. We use something called ADEPT in terms of evaluating new teachers that are coming on board. And we do have a teacher principal evaluation system in place. I think we need to refine that and retune it to ensure that we give all of these instructional leaders the opportunity to be fairly evaluated based on the job that they're doing in the classroom. And so one of the first things that I would do as State Superintendent of Education is to ask for a review of our present policies when it comes to this area, and then look at best practices in terms of other states that have outstanding programs in terms of their principal teacher evaluation models. And I think based on that, then we can refine and retune what we have. But I do believe that we do a fairly good job here in this state of evaluating both our teachers and our principals.
Thank you, and I think this is where my strength is. Recently coming out of the classroom as a principal, and I keep reiterating the fact of how important it is to get someone in this role who has practical experience evaluating teachers, and I've done that for the last 10 years of my adult life. My job has been evaluating teachers, and so I think I can speak to this with some type of authenticity. We need an evaluation system that's fair. We need one that's transparent. We need one, and in South Carolina, where we're struggle is defining what an effective teacher is and in developing an instrument that measures this effectiveness. What I am in support of is the South Carolina teaching standards that are being piloted in nearly 40 schools across South Carolina. I think that starts to get us there. But more importantly, not only do we need the fairness and the transparency, we need to have measures in place where we can support teachers, particularly our teachers that are struggling. But also we need to be able to accelerate the process to remove ineffective teachers if they're not doing what they need to do in front of our children.
We talk about practical experience. I've evaluated teachers for the past 30 years. I am in a position now as a specialization coordinator for Walden University, which is situated in Minneapolis, but is online, has online programs. And part of my job as a coordinator is administrative, and I not only teach, but I supervise employees, and I have to administer Walden's personnel employee evaluation system. So I've evaluated employees for the past 30 years. But being that what it is, I think what the teachers are most concerned about right now is this value-added concept, that their evaluation will be based on student performance. I think that has to be part of it, but right now it seems that a percentage that is allocated for that is much too high. So we have to be a lot more reasonable. Teachers are hired to make a difference, and I think evaluation has to include that.
Ms. Gallagher.
Thank you, sir. The evaluation plan for South Carolina is the ADEPT program. It also involves the SAFE-T. It could be the GBE, the goals-based evaluation, which some more experienced teachers would be on. We need an evaluation system which will give us the weaknesses and the strengths of our teachers. If you know those strengths and those weaknesses, you have a good plan out there before you. You can also see that it must be efficient, it has to be effective, it's got to be reliable, and most important, it's got to be accountable. We want teachers in the classroom that are going to be effective with our students, and the only way to do that, I was part of the ADEPT program, and I was an evaluator with ADEPT, and it's very important to be able to get those strengths and weaknesses out there for those teachers. You're trying to encourage people to stay in the classroom, and of course those that maybe would not fit, to help them leave. But the most important thing is that it is accountable to the public, so that the public understands we have the best in our schools.
Let me start the next round with Mr. Belton. Very straightforward question. How would you address failing schools as Superintendent of Education? Is it a state responsibility, and when do you step in?
Thank you. Recently I was down in the lower part of South Carolina, and I had a mother come to me, and she said, I'm African American, I have an African American son, I'm a single parent, I send my child to school every day, and the school is not only failing my child, but but the school has failed 3 generations of my family, and I vote 100% Democrat. And that's probably the most poignant conversation I've had since I've been running for office. Because what I heard from this parent is I don't want to elect anyone who's an apologist for the system. So I stand here tonight, and as I've said the past 8 months, if I'm elected superintendent of education, the best thing we can do for these communities that have failed children is to immediately offer parental choice, public choice to these parents, so they can immediately, as the state, we can immediately give those children an opportunity to go to a school within the state, a public choice, and we provide transportation and the resources follow the child to the school. That's what I would do as superintendent of education.
Mr. Thompson.
As superintendent of education, I strongly believe that all children can learn and all schools can be excellent schools if given the right resources and in the right environment. I think that, yes, the state is responsible for failing schools. They're responsible to help failing schools. I think one of the problems that we have right now is that our schools are being underserviced by the Department of Education, to the extent that relationships between the state superintendent of education and superintendents and principals is practically non-existent. I think in order to solve issues regarding failing schools, we need to take a collaborative approach with the system as a whole, so that we exert collaborative, positive energy together towards addressing the issues that our failing schools have.
Ms. Gallagher.
Sir, I think one of the most important things we're going to have to do is to engage our parents, engage the communities where we have these failing schools. That community knows their own problems, and we can help them by addressing those problems in the schools. Many times it's a lack of resource. They are at the classrooms where we have teachers that come and go after a couple years because the teachers are not fully engaged in that community. So that becomes a top priority. What the State Department has to do is to go down there and help, not just step in, but be there as mentors and be there to engage these teachers as well into their classrooms. We need to provide more opportunity for these students once they are in high school and they are opportunity to go to tech or guidance. They got to see what their future is. It would also help if we had really good quality after-school programs that would help them.
Govan.
Well, certainly assigning letter grades is not a solution to the problem of addressing schools who are going through difficulties. And the truth of the matter is that in South Carolina, the problem is that we haven't done our part. This state basically supports school systems inadequately. We haven't fully funded the base student costs. Right now, even though the state's budget is back up to roughly about $7 billion, which is about at our height. When I came in, the legislature was at about $3 billion. We still haven't fully funded the base student costs, so we're short there. In addition to that, I don't believe that the solution to the problem is just simply addressing the issue of schools. We also have to look at schools in communities, because schools are part of communities. So we have to do more to provide support to our teachers, our schools, but also to our parents.
Rachel Southmaid has the next question, and if you would start with Mr. Thompson.
I'd like to go back to Mr. Belton's point about choice schools, not just when it comes to struggling schools, but also when it comes to charter schools, and wondering what you all think about choice and charter schools and the current system that we have set up, or how you'd like to see it evolve.
I am not in favor of any structure that removes resources from public schools. I think our public schools are the foundation for our communities and for our economic development system in the state. So I think we have to first concentrate on making our public education system as strong as we possibly can before we look at other entities. But now, in terms of options within the public school system, yes, I, as state superintendent, I'd be more than willing, the first day that I'm state superintendent, to say every school district needs to have public options for children and their families, so that children can and families can have options for students to get their needs met. They may be interested in a STEM education, so there needs to be something available for children in those areas. They may be interested in art or music. There needs to be options available.
I would support any type of public charter schools because the public dollars need to stay within the public realm. I would not support having our parents and our students jumping around from district to district or school to school. I think we're going to hurt our diversity that really brings you a true public education in our schools. We have to have an opportunity, and I think charter schools will do that, to allow our students different from what is on the books of how we want to run our schools. And that's what a charter school gives us the opportunity to do. And I think when we go just a step farther from the STEM is to go to STEAM, the science, technology, mathematics, engineering, as well as the arts. That will make the biggest difference, I think, and within our own public schools, not necessarily having to go to a charter school.
I think there are a lot of people who are championing this issue in terms of talking about choice. But I think we must be very careful in terms of how we define choice. Now, if we're talking about allowing flexibility in our public school systems in terms of within districts of parents making decisions in terms of whether their child goes to school A or as opposed to B, and working with that school board in terms of making those decisions, that's fine. When you talk about charter, I think charter schools are good in their own right if they deal within the whole confine of what you're talking about in terms of the overall district plan. But when you're talking about creating a system of separate but equal, because in essence that's where we're going to, then I have issues with that. We have to be very careful in the state of South Carolina that we don't revert back to a system in which you have the haves and the have-nots, because certain parents have means and capabilities of transporting their children from point A to point B and others do not. So we have to be very careful that we don't end up basically going back to the same situation that we had in the 50s and 60s, but instead this being based upon socioeconomic status.
And this is where I have to respond to my colleague here, Mr. Govan. We already have choice in South Carolina. We already have haves and have-nots, and we already have choices that are made based on economics. It's called our zip code. It's called those of us, and probably all of us here on this stand tonight, we're well educated. We have the resources. We moved into zip codes where we have access to quality public education. And I'm not in favor of abandoning these schools from your last question, but while we try to, well-meaning people try to fix these schools, as we've tried to do for the past 60 years, we need to give immediate relief to those parents. So while we are collaborating and support, that mother in the low part of South Carolina, she needs an answer tomorrow. She has one time to send her children through the public schools of South Carolina. Secondly, I believe in charter schools. Charter schools are public schools in South Carolina, so let's not conflate the issue. We should fully fund them. They should have equitable dollars, and if parents choose that choice within the public environment, the dollars associated with that child should follow.
Gina Smith has the next question, and we'll start with Ms. Gallagher.
Okay. Ms. Gallagher, you've said that the legalization of marijuana to pay for public education should be put before voters. You've gotten some pushback on that, I think, from Dr. Belton included. Many view marijuana as a dangerous gateway drug. Do you still support the idea, and what do the other candidates think on the issue?
Yes, I still support the idea of looking at a referendum on the legalization of marijuana. I think we have approximately 2 years if we do a referendum. So you have time for a data-driven discussion on the pros and cons and weigh those pros and cons. You can look at what's happening in the state of Washington as well as in Colorado as to see over that 2-year period, is this going as well as we think it is? We have lack funding in our public schools basically because the General Assembly hasn't funded it. I think we have to not begin looking at marijuana as the gateway drug. If you really become up to date on our drugs, you find out that our problem is really not the marijuana. Our problem is what's sitting in our medicine cabinets. And too many of our students have figured out what to do with those medicines to turn them in to get a high. We also have the ability of tobacco, alcohol, also become very offensive to trying to promote a good a quality lifestyle for our students.
Mr. Govan.
Well, first of all, marijuana is a gateway drug, and as someone who worked in the 301 system with alcohol and drug abuse as a primary prevention specialist, I can tell you that I do not believe that we need to try to fund public education in the state of South Carolina on the backs of using what we call the sin taxes. If we are serious about public education in South Carolina, the General Assembly and the leadership of this state, including the executive branch, the governor, and the people and the citizens of this state have to demand this, then we need to make it a core priority. And the way you do that is you fully fund public education. We can start by changing the Constitution. Instead of suggesting that we should minimally provide our kids with minimally adequate education, we should say that we want to provide every child with a high quality education. Now, going back to what Mr. Belton, Mr. Montrio said earlier, you know, I think we have to again look at this problem for what it is. We have to fully fund education. South Carolina is the tale of two interstates, I-95 and I-85. And if you look at the disparities, it's because of the way the money is distributed. And so therefore we need to seriously look at how we fund public education in the state. And I'm suggesting that we have a sit down with the General Assembly, and this is where I think my experience comes into play, that we can look at how we fund EIA, EFA in this state and get to a point where we can look at the disparities and how we fund public education in the state of South Carolina. And until we do that, we're not going to make any progress.
Mr. Belton?
In all fairness to my colleague here, Mr. Govan, he's running on the fact that he's been in the General Assembly for 21 years, so certainly that's ample enough time that he doesn't have to sit down with the General Assembly. He's there with them every day. So if there was a plan that he had over 21 years, certainly we would have seen it by now. With that being said, in terms of marijuana, I stand by my position on that. I'm the father of a young boy who's in the 3rd grade. So what I'm supposed to do tonight as an educator is go home and tell my son, participate in Red Ribbon Week and all the other anti-drug initiatives, and don't do drugs until you turn 18. And once you start turning 18, I need you to start smoking marijuana so you can fund the public schools that are coming along behind you. That's just nonsensical to me. Secondly, it creates the problem we have with funding and education right now is it's an unstable funding source. So what we're telling the citizens of South Carolina, if you smoke 3 joints this year, education will get $3. If you smoke 1 joint next year, education will only get $1. It creates another unstable funding source based on how much marijuana one uses. That just is absolutely nonsensical to me.
Mr. Thompson.
Matching, there are certain things, some things that just shouldn't be matched. And I think public education and marijuana is one of them. I can't vision having a situation here in South Carolina where we say, buy marijuana so we can have high quality schools. That just doesn't make sense to me either. If we're going to fund public education, again, yes, like Dr. Belton indicated, we need a stable fund. So we need to work together with the legislature to make sure that the funding for public education has a stable base so that school districts know what to expect from year to year, know what they're going to have so that they can plan appropriately. Marijuana and as Mr. Govan indicated, other sin taxes and even the sales taxes, they are not stable taxes and they do not do the job for public education.
A lot of what we're talking about here is revolving around money. There's no question about that. How it's collected, how it's allocated, what resources there might be, and several of you have addressed this in a variety of ways. I'd like to stay on that subject and starting with Mr. Govan, if it's not marijuana, if it's not federal money, and some people would say it should be federal money, where do you find the funds that are lacking? Have you got one thing you can put your finger on, Mr. Govan?
Well, thank you for that question, and I'll overlook the naivety of Mr. Belton here in terms of, because I think my record speaks for itself with 21 years there, considering what I as a Democrat and others have done in terms of trying to move this state forward on this educational issue. But one of the things that really set us back was the passage of Act 388. And as a result of what happened in terms of that act, we basically took the most stable funding for public education of this state off the table and reverted basically to a sales tax. Now, I was one of those legislators who actually fought against that act being passed, but of course, you understanding that the political dynamics of the state, you know, we lost on that vote. What we have to do is we have to move the state back to the point at least we can put a discussion on the table in terms of how we make the funding more equitable. I believe that the South Carolina Association of School Board Association and the financial officers have a pretty good plan in which they attempt to redistribute but hold harmless those districts in their current positions that are receiving certain levels of funding, but also addressing the funding disparities in other areas of the state. The other thing that I've stated publicly is the fact that I think it's important that the Supreme Court move forward and resolve the equity lawsuit in terms of Abbeville versus South Carolina. I believe that'll set the tone, and from there I think you'll begin to see additional movement from the General Assembly to comply.
Thank you, Mr. Belton.
Thank you. Despite the voter guide that went out by SEEA, my public position nor my private position has never been that we don't need more funding in education. What I've said, and I want to clarify it, is that I'm not convinced that more money will solve the problems we have in education. But I'm also not convinced that less money will solve the problems. What I've said is we have a convoluted, complex funding mechanism that very few people, my wife, who is a mathematician, cannot explain the math formula for EFA in the state of South Carolina. So if we want to make movements in terms of education, I think the best thing we can do is simplify this complex funding formula where the general public can understand it. And once the general public gets an understanding, and then we can have a debate that's not steeped in political ideology, but a real serious debate about how we fund education and whether we have enough resources or we don't have enough resources. And to the other point, in terms of Act 388, that is a regressive tax on poor people, because not just rich people will pay that. And I even look at myself, and I'm going to tell you something, Mr. Govan. If you repeal Act 388, every Democrat that fits in my demographic is going to vote against you if you're the nominee, because I'm talking about me. That's an extra couple of $200-300 a month that my mortgage payment goes up. So South Carolina is not going to be in favor of that.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson.
Our financing system in South Carolina is not that difficult to understand. The base student cost that's included in the EFA is a fairly straightforward formula. I used to teach it when I taught education finance at the University of South Carolina. What is important is that the base student costs formula that is there, as Mr. Govan has indicated, has never been fully funded. That is why we have the discrepancies that we have in our public education system. If the issue is money, and yes, and the issue is how the legislature gets the money, I'd be willing to stand here and say right now, give us another penny, give us 2 pennies. If you can't hinge it on property taxes and we have to settle for the sales tax, put an additional 2 pennies in there for public education.
Ms. Gallagher?
Yes, sir. Our first issue is going to be the engagement of our parents and our communities in this issue. But you have to go back to the days of when we had video poker, and video poker was taken off the table, and that took dollars away from all public agencies. Then along came Act 388, and Representative Govan was a fighter not to have that happen, but it happened. And it does need to change. I think we have to look at what we pay in our taxes as what we do when we think about our churches when we do tithing. I think our taxes are a tithing to our communities, and I think we need to start looking at it like that. We also have to be sure that the public understands there are other tax exemptions out there. It doesn't matter what kind of car you get, it's only $300. You can get a Learjet for $300 on taxes. I think we have a little problem with doing something about these issues on our tax exemptions. We also have to look at the fact that the public does not quite understand the lottery that was passed a few years back, that lottery is for scholarships, and that it does not really go towards the public school except for a very small amount.
Thank you. Gina Smith, questions starting with Mr. Belton.
South Carolina, like the rest of the nation, will soon face a teacher shortage, exacerbated by all the baby boomers who are retiring, including my mother. What would you do as superintendent to recruit new teachers during this challenging time of high-stakes testing and low pay?
Thank you. And I'm going to start by responding to something here. I would be in opposition of a sales tax. Again, I may not understand that formula, but I do understand taxes. I'm from Abbeville, and I've worked with some of our most struggling citizens for the past 3 years. That is a regressive tax, and it really disproportionately hurts poor people, and I would be opposed to any increase in sales taxes. Now, with that being said, we have to create an environment where teachers want to work. One of the greatest challenges for a principal is creating a school environment where teachers want to work and teachers want to be. Certainly teachers deserve to be paid more. The question becomes, how do we do it? So we've created an environment where teachers want to work. We also create mechanisms where teachers can earn more money without having to go into administration, and we create an evaluation system that's fair, that's equitable, that teachers understand it's transparent, and they can get career goals without having to leave the classroom. And we honor the commitments that we've made to teachers. We've made a commitment if they get a master's degree. We've made a commitment to national boards. And so we need to honor those commitments, and that's how South Carolina can start recruiting teachers.
Mr. Thompson.
You know, I'm not quite sure I understand Dr. Belton's position. He seems to be against sales tax, but he seems to be against reverting to property tax to fund public education. So where's the money going to come from? We need to fully fund the base student cost, and the money needs to come from somewhere. So we need to make a decision, where's the best place for it to come. In terms of recruiting teachers, recruiting and retaining teachers, we need to make the teaching profession much more attractive for particularly new and young teachers. We need to change the way we train teachers, first of all, so that they are better prepared for entering the classroom, and then pay them for what they're worth. We need to show teachers how valuable they are to the system. And I would be willing, as state superintendent, to talk with or work with school districts to make sure that bringing new teachers into the districts, particularly our poor rural districts, will be something that they can do, to talk about things that they can do that will help to attract those teachers and retain them in those districts. A lot of it has to do with the socialization of those teachers into the system, and there are things that we can do.
Thank you, Ms. Gallagher.
Yes, sir. We need to recruit and to retain teachers we have. Maybe we can even convince your mother to stay. One of the things that you have to do is be sure that you have the assistance that teachers needs. Too many times we don't have the workbooks, we don't have the material that teachers need in order to have a great classroom. And they go out and they spend their own dollars. So again, we're back to funding and the resources that are needed in the immediate classroom. We also have to decide that in our pre-K through third grade, those classes are made smaller, and that we always have some type of assistant or teacher's aide in there to work with our teachers. I can't think of anything more challenging than dealing with the little people in a classroom. The most important thing, though, is to look at the fact that testing does not make a judgment on any teacher in any year, nor does it do anything for any student at any one time. Testing is just there for that time to let you know to move on from there. Now, some tests are much better and much more progressive in what they give that teacher in her response to her classes, but most of the time, high testing, no, that doesn't really judge on what that teacher does that year.
Mr. Govan.
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is we need to make a commitment, as I stated earlier, and invest in public education in the state of South Carolina. That's something that means that we have to look at the way we fund public education. One of the things that I think we can do, if you consider the fact that, for example, the General Assembly gave over $30 million of incentives in terms of to lure borrowing to South Carolina. We also paid money in as taxpayers to lure BMW to the state. We do that for countless numbers of businesses in the industry. The problem is that these businesses in industry located in certain areas, and those areas contribute to the local tax base. What I like to put on the table and see that we discuss at least put it up for discussion, is to look at how do we apply those dollars that are coming in and do it in an equitable way to all areas of the state so that we can address some of these funding inadequacies. The other thing is, in terms of the answer your question about attraction and retention of teachers, I think first of all we need to get rid of some of the bureaucracy and the paperwork, and then look at local ways in terms of we can provide incentives to keep those teachers here, particularly the good ones.
Thank you. Next question, Rachel Southmaid, and start with Mr. Thompson.
I can't believe we've gotten this far into it without bringing up the word Common Core, or the words Common Core. What do you see as the future of the Common Core state standards in South Carolina, particularly given recent legislative indication that we might start to move away from it?
I predict that we'll start moving back towards a Common Core. We have in our educational system, we have to increase the rigor that is there, that is absent now, so that we are sure that we can graduate students who are prepared for the workforce or whatever their next step is after graduation, college, military, whatever. And the Common Core standards were going to do that. The sad part about this whole Common Core thing is that we've had districts around the state that have been working for 2-3 years in preparing for Common Core, and the teachers have gotten excited in those districts about Common Core because they see the possibilities that are there, moving away from fact testing to problem solving, and they are very disappointed that we've taken the stand towards the Common Core that we have. I think Common Core will be good for our schools, and I foresee it coming back.
I'm going to piggyback on everything that Dr. Thompson just said, and then also mention the fact that this was an example of the State Department and just very specifically the Superintendent of Education backing off of what had been promised to the classroom teachers. You're going to work on Common Core, then you're going to work with this test out there, and let's see how well we do and where our strengths and weaknesses are in our classrooms. And he on his own decided that we were no longer going to worry about Common Core because he wasn't going to have the Smarter Balance test. That's a major blow to your classrooms when that's what they're looking for. Common Core is basically standards. Doesn't matter what grade you're at, you want to meet, doesn't matter what the discipline is, you want to meet that. And if you don't meet that at whatever grade level, then if you're at the 3rd grade, you don't meet those standards, how are you going to do well in the 4th grade? And the same thing moves on. So Common Core is a set of standards. It has gotten a bad rap out there, and we need to do a better discussion that should have come from the Department of Education on what Common Core was.
Mr. Govan?
Well, there's a saying that everything rises and falls with leadership, and I concur with my 2 colleagues in terms of what they said, because Common Core is something that got caught up into politics, and we should be not about politics, but we should be about what's in the best interest of our children. And what happened was, in essence, is that some folk tied Common Core into this grand government conspiracy to take over the education of our kids. But that's not what it was about. It was about consistency, and the school officers and the school leadership and instructional leaders from all these states got together and said that we want to do this so we can compare apples to apples and oranges to oranges. And what in essence happened was our state superintendent reneged on that promise. So now we're stuck. We're going to deal with the standards. The General Assembly has already passed legislation based on and taken action, and we're going to do our version of Common Core, and that's basically what it boils down to. So we will have a rigor. We're right now just looking at how we're going to evaluate or come up with an appropriate assessment tool to do what Smarter Balance would have done.
Mr. Belton?
It boils down to political ideology, and this was just an ideological fight. And I say to my fellow citizens of South Carolina, our education system struggles enough in many ways that to be diverted from the things that are most important in our state to this focus on Common Core, in my opinion, that has no academic floor whatsoever to it. It had no academic relevancy whatsoever, because anyone who can sit down and look at standards, and you compare the 2007 math standards that we had in South Carolina to the math standards, Common Core math standards, there was very little difference. Very little difference in the standards. And I also say to parents, particularly those parents who are in opposition of Common Core, I'm a parent of a 3rd grader. Next year he will be in the 4th grade, hopefully. With that being said, he would have had 3 different standards that he would have been taught under as a child That's not fair to him as a student, and it's certainly not fair to the teachers that we hold responsible for educating. My daughter, who's in kindergarten, if we move from Common Core, we'll have had 2 different standards in our first 2 years of school. That's not fair to her teachers, and it's not fair to the students. So I hopefully, with the move that the General Assembly has made, we'll get beyond this conversation and start having some real conversations about education in South Carolina.
Thank you. By way of keeping time, we've got about 10 minutes left. I want to make sure that Gina and Rachel each have another shot at you. So, Gina.
There's been a lot of talk this legislative session about 4K. Should we expand it? Should we expand it to just certain groups? Should it be universal? But Republicans have pointed out time and time again that research is really split, that 4K is not necessarily an indicator of a student's likelihood of long-term success. What do y'all think? What do y'all make of the research about 4K, and what do you think South Carolina should do?
Well,
whose turn is it?
I'm not sure, but I'll be happy. I'll be happy.
Ms. Gallagher's turn.
Pre-K, definitely. The more that you can have our children come in, most of the time it is not a full day, it's a half day. It's that whole beginning process of socialization with children, the beginning of them sitting down and understanding what they're learning from just their little peers. It's not all play. And the whole process of this is education. This is something that will make me better. We have to keep improving with our students. And so the whole idea, the earlier that we can, I don't mean from birth, I know you're on birth thing, but the sooner we can get them, the sooner we can get them into these classrooms and into that setting and into that mode of enjoying learning and being successful in learning, that's going to make all the difference. So yes, I think it is important.
Well, my background's I have my Master's of Arts in Teaching in early childhood, and I assure you that universal 4K is a move in the right direction. Matter of fact, if you couple universal 4K with a strong parenting and family literacy program, the research shows that we can really make a difference in children's lives. So I'm absolutely in support of that. The Senate, when they passed their budget over, and it just got over to us, I think moved it down to 68.1% of poverty in terms of funding it. I think we can eventually do better, if not this year, as we move forward. And again, if the Supreme Court settles that Abbeville versus South Carolina case, I think we'll shift more funding in those early years to ensure that our children get a base start. Because if you look at what other countries are doing, and if you look at the progress and their test scores and how they're doing in education, most of those industrialized nations invest a lot of money in terms of universal 4K education. So I think it's absolutely essential.
Mr. Belton.
Excellent question. Thank you so much. I was asked up in Greenville, did I support pre-K education? And I told them I support pre-K education because I support me. I shudder to think 41 years now into my life, would I be in a position where I could stand with the highest educational degree that you can attain and be running for the highest educational office in this state if it had not been for Head Start and Head Start preparing me for kindergarten. Now, we can talk about what the research says, and I can show you opposing research that says something different. But all of us who say that research says that it's mixed, we all who have means run down to every pre-K education. We ran to McFeed and Rock Hill at Winthrop, got on a waiting list so we could get our children in pre-K education. So all the ones who say that the research is research is different about pre-K education, we all put our children in pre-K education. So I would like the Superintendent of Education to really start leading this conversation about pre-K education and how we can marry public and private partnerships to create opportunities that we can expand pre-K to all the students in South Carolina.
Mr. Thompson.
And you know I've been chomping at the bit to answer this question because I'll go you one better. As I indicated before, I strongly support the concept of birth to kindergarten. I think the research that you're talking about says that the advantage that the pre-K students get over those that didn't do pre-K gets wiped out about third grade. My proposal is that if we start at birth, providing the kinds of experiences that children need over that developmental period to be prepared for kindergarten, then everybody's on a level playing field. so that we move along together, so we don't have to worry about wiping out the benefit of early childhood education. So I think that birth to kindergarten is the right way to go.
Thank you. Next question, Rachel, starting with Mr. Govan.
One of the greatest roles of the superintendent of education is to bridge the gap between what happens at the state level and what happens at the local level. Not because of your background and because of your past experience, but what will you do if elected to effectively bridge that gap, not just for parents, but for everyone in the community?
Well, I think first of all that there has to be a building of some relationships there. As you are well aware, there have been estranged relationships between the current superintendent of education and the current superintendents in the school districts and with the school boards. I think a superintendent of education has to be, again, as I stated earlier, an advocate in chief. And I don't think that's what we've had. We basically had politics basically dictate the policy coming out of the State Department. And I think that's time to stop. If I'm the next state superintendent of education, it doesn't matter whether a person's Democrat or Republican, we need to have a dialogue. It doesn't matter where they are, a person is a parent in terms of their political philosophy, then we need to have a dialogue. So I see myself as a very outgoing superintendent who wants to bridge that gap, working very closely with the local schools and school districts, of being in those schools and utilizing the experiences that I've had as a parent in terms of working with parents and coming up with innovative programs and approaches to try to bring them into the mix. Because again, as I stated earlier, schools are communities. They're not just about one aspect versus another.
Mr. Belton.
Thank you. In the nearly 20 years that I've been involved in public education, whether as a teacher, whether as a coach or whatever, I've never been asked whether I was a Republican or a Democrat or how I voted in the last election or what my political philosophy or ideology is. Parents want people, and these local communities want people who are willing to lead, have ideas, understand those ideas, and can lead by the power of their ideas. They also want people who will listen, who will hear the cries of their. My position on school choice was changed when I was in the lower part of South Carolina listening to this woman, and also willing to learn. None of us up here, nobody who's running, has all the answers to everything, but you're willing to bring in a collaborative way people around the table, and you're willing to listen to them and learn the intricacies of these local communities. And then lastly, and I think most importantly, that you have an idea of where you want the state to go, and you have a vision for public education, and you can articulate that vision in a nonpartisan way to bring people together around a common goal of improving public education in South Carolina.
Mr. Thompson.
I'd like to introduce a concept called aggressive engagement that pretty much opens the doors of the schools to the community, for the community to come in and for the students to go out. Aggressive engagement means having the community embrace the school, where parents are welcome, businesses are welcome, they're welcome there every day to help, to assist, to participate in the educational process and the operation of the school. I think when parents are there, when the community embraces a school, the children feel safer, they feel better about their school, they do better. When children are involved in the community in a reciprocal process, involved in meaningful projects, they learn responsibility, they learn leadership, they feel better about themselves, they do better. I think that's a relationship that has mutual benefits for the community and for the school. It's good for our children, it's good for our communities.
Ms. Gallagher.
Yes, sir. We have to advocate for all of our public schools. And that means we're advocating for all of our educators. The most important person in our classroom are our students. And so we're advocates for them because they really don't have a voice in whatever political scene is going on. But for us to make that change, it's going to take engagement within the communities, time with them, and that is one of the jobs of the superintendent, is to go out into the communities. It is to work very strongly with our superintendents of education. The majority of them are elected by school boards, which are elected by the people in that community. And also to be sure that we have our teachers included in leadership roles at the State Department as well as in our local school districts. And I think we're going to find a major change when we do that.
We have a little less than 2 minutes, so this is the quick round. It's going to start with Mr. Belton. Let me ask you this. There's been restructuring of government in South Carolina, particularly around the governor's office during this year. This is still one of the few statewide offices that is elected superintendent of education. Should it remain that way? And if so, why?
Yes, it should remain elected, and the primary reason it should, and as a matter of fact, the broader question is, should it even be a political, should it be a partisan office? If I had any recommendation that we would not have to run as Republicans or Democrats, we could just run as people who are interested in education and give the public an opportunity. So why should it remain nonpartisan? Or why should it remain an elected position? Because being an elected position, and even though I've been in education for as long as I have, it forced me to have to learn.
Mr. Thompson.
Yes, it should be. It should remain an elected position. I think public education needs to have a strong advocate for the system. With it being an elected position, you don't have to apologize to the governor. You don't have to apologize to the legislature. You promote public education, and I would do it without any excuse. Public education needs to be strong. It's an economic development issue. It's a jobs issue.
Ms. Gallagher, 20 seconds.
Yes, sir. It should be an elected position because we are there for the children, and the best way to be there for the children is to have no ties to anybody else except for our children.
Mr. Govan.
Without question, it should be an elected position because it allows the accountability that I think is necessary for a person to be effective in that position, to be held accountable directly to the citizens of this state. And I think when you have that accountability, then you have much more of effective assistance.
I thank you all. Thanks to all of our candidates for joining us tonight. Thank you to Gina Smith and Rachel Southmaid. For more information on all the upcoming ETV debates, visit sceetv.org. Now for all of us here at ETV, I'm Charles Bierbauer. Thank you for joining us and good night.